My son asked to help build a nightstand for his bedroom. So he started by making a 3D model, and we used that to kind of figure it all out. And you can see the main design features, the kind of radius on the corners. So we started by milling down a piece of ash to 3/4 of an inch thick. And that's for the main kind of frame that has the 3-inch radius. And then we cleaned up the edges on the table saw. Now we're just prepping it to kind of bend all the way around, adding some mortises in the two ends to put some dominoes to connect them. Just using this jig from 3x3 Custom to cut mortises using the plunge router. Just cut 2 mortises on both ends. We downloaded a curve calculator online, printed it out, and uses that to mark out the cuts to make a 3-inch radius. And just use a circular saw and a speed square. The first attempt we didn't quite get to 90. We were like 10 degrees off maybe. Did some math, figured out that we just need 2 more cuts and it would work perfectly. You can see here just approaching 90 with some clamps. There it is, looks pretty good. So then we move on to cut the rest of the corners. And this circular saw is not very light, so it was a lot of work and wore me out. Had to take a few breaks. So after we cut it, we started bending and clamping it into place. Just kind of move slow and kind of sprayed the corners. I'm not sure if the moisture helped, but it seemed like it did. So we let it sit there for about an hour. Probably should have left it longer, but we got impatient and just started adding glue to do the final kind of glue up. We did not plan very well, and it just kind of was chaotic, but you know, that's how it goes. So we started getting some clamps in there. The glue made it a lot harder for some reason. I'm not sure why. Just messy. And then he started rubbing his hands in the glue for some reason. And then when I was editing, I found this. Satisfying glue peel. So now he's cutting the boards to make the panel for the top of the nightstand. So you can see him laying it out, figuring out the best look. So now he's just gluing it up. He's going to do 2 separate glue ups so we can fit half panels in the planer. Final glue up with the one joint in the middle. So after that dried a couple hours, came back, unclamped it, and cleaned up the extra glue, and then just set the frame on top to mark it out. And then come back the next day, cut it out with the jigsaw, leaving lots of room for overhang. So here I'm switching to the bottom of the frame. So I'm ripping some pieces to make a couple kind of stretchers that the legs will attach to. So I'm just adding some pocket screws and attaching that to the inside of the frame. And I decided to leave the bottom of the nightstand open to give access to the inside for assembly, and you'll see why later. So now I'm using a biscuit joiner to add some slots to attach the top with Z-clips. I'm using the Z-clips here to allow for some wood movement in the top. So now that it's temporarily attached, I'm going to use a flush trim router bit to clean up that edge that we originally cut with the jigsaw. And that'll make it perfectly match the radius of the frame. Then I'm going to switch to a V-groove bit, and that'll give that joint a bit of a shadow line, so that when there is some wood movement, it'll kind of hide that a little bit. And then after that, I'm going to switch to a small round over for the top. So you can see kind of a jig I made. I used a kind of a vertical sled with the miter gauge to cut the face of the drawer off the frame, and then flipped it around and attached it to that vertical sled again. And cut the other side. It was very satisfying to separate this. Now I'm attaching the drawer slides to the inside of the frame, and I added a 3/4 inch spacer to kind of clear the back radius. I could have used shorter drawer slides, but I had these sitting around, so didn't feel like buying new ones. Made the drawer a little deeper, but a little narrower at the same time. Of course, that spacer also made it really difficult to attach the Z-clips for the final assembly, so I had to use a flexible screwdriver, but it worked. And here you can see why I left the bottom kind of open. It made that final assembly much easier. So now we're going to move on to work on the legs. So we started by drawing a template onto a piece of cardboard and used that to figure out the angles and then to trace them onto the wood with the angle gauge. And then we decided to use a palm router with a pattern bit to cut the half laps. And we just kind of clamped on some straight boards and kind of the width of the half laps at the right angles.
Boogers! Look, my boogers are what?
And that's where he learned he should use a dust mask. So I used the ones he cut as a guide and just finished up the last couple legs. And then I did a dry fit just with clamps, figure out any last things and figure out the angle of the display at the top, and used that to set the table saw and then cut those top pieces where it connects to the base. The half laps were a little loose, so I decided to stack them while I clamped so they would be exactly the same. Sanding. See, cleaning up those half laps, putting a little glue in there, and then I'm just going to sand with the dust collector off. Sawdust fills those gaps and the glue is. Sprinkle in a little more extra sawdust there. And makes those joints look perfect. I'm just softening all the edges with some sandpaper. Now I'm making the drawer box, so I ripped this 6/4 piece of ash and then resawed it in half. And I just ran it through the planer to get it to roughly 1/2 inch thick. And I'm putting a groove for the bottom panel to slot into, and then just cutting the length. And then cutting the bottom panel. Blew off the side on this pocket screw. So I just glued it back in place and used my little favorite mini clamp. You'll never know. You never would have seen it anyway. I'm just attaching the drawer box to the drawer slides. Just using some double-sided carpet tape to temporarily attach the front. Lined up. And then giving it a clamp and then screwing it in from the inside of the drawer box. And the first little test close here. And it was a little saggy, so I had to adjust the drawer sides. Now it's perfect. So yeah, and then I'm going to send it off, and then my son's going to finish it himself. So that's it. I'm all done.